Hello there, I'm John Al, and welcome back to the Computer Science Associates Study Guide for the Associates exam. Today, we'll be talking about legal identifiers in Java. So, in many programming languages, they leave it up to you how to name the different conventions, kind of like variables and classes and methods. And these names that you've selected have identifier rules so that the compiler doesn't crash, and most importantly, so it understands, so it can be used within the system, so the compiler doesn't crash. So what is an identifier? Identifier is the technical term for program component's name, the name of class, method, and so on. Identifiers must consist entirely of letters, digits, $signs, and/or underscore characters. The first character must not be a digit. Incorrect identifiers will not compile. Also, reserved words, like for example, class, can't be used because class is a word that does something in Java, and Java already recognizes it as something else, and so you can't name a class because the compiler won't understand what you're talking about, and so on and so forth. You can't use reserved words as names because Java interprets them as something else. Also, you need to use unique names. So let's say I have string, we'll call it Joe. I can't make another string named Joe in the same way. That's not okay. I could make that Joe, and that would work because it's case sensitive. So this here and this here are two different names. However, going beyond identifiers for a second, in convention you normally wouldn't start this type of name with an uppercase, so you wouldn't actually use that, but you could write it this way, though your program might quickly become confusing. Okay, so for example, some legal identifiers. So let's say we wanted to declare a variable int that holds integer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, -1, -2, -3, etc., etc., etc. Then let's call it number of apples. See, throughout it, you only use letters. That's fine. That's a legal identifier. Now let's create an int called number of apples, which will lead us into the next part. First of all, this is not an accepted character. It won't know what you're talking about. It's trying to do something else. Java will freak out. It won't compile. And if it does compile, there'll be errors. Second, you can't have this white space. There can't be spaces in between variable names, as the compiler will not understand what the space is for. Spaces are used as a specific indicator, and putting a space in between a variable is like you're creating a separate variable, and it will be confused on what you're trying to do. Now you also can't do this because you can't start with a number. The compiler will go, what are you talking about? I don't know what this is. So that's unacceptable. However, you could start with an underscore. Also, you can write it however you want. An identifier doesn't necessarily have to make sense. Like that would be a perfectly valid identifier. Of course, to a user, this kind of identifier would be rather painful, and that leads us into the next section, which is convention. So beyond identifiers, you want to worry about conventions, which is our common way, our agreed standard of writing names. So first of all, there's some simple rules. We don't use $signs, and we don't use underscore. Simple enough. Also, technically, we don't use uppercase letters except for in certain situations. For example, when you're naming a class, you can name the class with an uppercase letter. That is convention, to name the class with an uppercase letter, not can, you should. And the only other time is, let's say I want to write a name that needs a little more information, and I kind of did it just a second ago. But let's say I want to say the number of people in class. So I would go num people in class. Now, the only problem with this in particular is this is where people would argue, because num technically isn't as descriptive as you could be, but we'll get to that in a second. But the most important thing is it starts with lowercase, then each consecutive word that you're trying to distinguish has an uppercase letter, so then you can read it as num people in class, rather than just a jumbled mess that you don't know if it's people or people inc or lass. Like that could be anything. And for some things it doesn't matter as particular if you already know what you're looking for, like this, but in different strings that are a little more, or different character alignments that are a little more confusing or jumbled up, it's very important to have this camel case style, so then it's easy to read. The next thing is, I was talking about num. So when you're writing a name, let's say I wanted to put number, I could just put n or num. Technically, you really shouldn't use num. You might be able to slide with num because people are like, oh, number. But if you're working on a project where for some reason you had to have, like, let's say it could be interpreted as numerous, then in that specific project you would want to write out the full name. And for a lot of class names and methods and variables, it's very important to be descriptive. That's probably the most important thing about the whole convention, is that when you write your variable names, you should be descriptive. Like I could easily say like number like that. And to me, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm just trying to say, although of course, sorry, numpict. See, for me, that might make sense. It might even make sense right now. But down the line, when I come back to this, I'll have no idea what I was trying to do in, 2 weeks, 2 months, or even like years And if somebody else has to come back to it in that amount of time and they come back to me, I'll be like, I don't know. So it's better to just say number people in class today and write it all out. See, num picked, you're like, okay, it's a number, and this could be a picture, or, but then what's the T? Picked, pictogram. Num, you might be able to get that again, but somebody might confuse it as numerous because of the project you're working on. I can't think of anything at the moment, but that could come up. And so numerous pictograms, well, who knows? So it's best to just make sure that when you're writing things out, they're quite descriptive. So as recap, legal identifiers, you only use underscores, $signs, letters, and digits, and you can't start with a number, but if the number comes later, that's perfectly fine. In convention, we don't use $signs, underscores, or capitals, and we only use capitals in specific circumstances, which are we use it for a class name and for camel case words so that we can tell the difference between the next word and read the name fluidly. And that is the legal identifiers within Java and coding convention rules within Java. A little 2-for-1 special. All right. I hope this was useful for you guys. Thank you for stopping by. If you found it useful, please subscribe to the channel for more videos, like it, and hope to see you in the future. Bye-bye.